Have you got color in your cheeks? Do you ever get that feel that you can't shift the tide that sticks around like summits in your teeth? Are there some aces up your sleeve? Have you no idea that you're in?
All right, what's going on, everybody? I am the one, the only, the WOOKIE, joined along, as always, by close Keyforge friends. What's up, Z?
Hey,
What's going on, Mr. Ewok?
Hello, Keyforge community.
And then, of course, Dan. Yeah, he's here. So, I think we haven't done Why I Suck at Keyforge in quite a number of episodes now, correct?
It's been a little while.
It's been like 3 or 4 episodes since we've done a Why I Suck at Keyforge.
Well, we haven't been sucking is the problem.
Right, but with a new set comes new opportunity.
Yes.
So, Z, this one's yours. Talk to us about tide turning.
I had it here because we have had conversations with the team. I can't think of specifically when I've done this, but the more I've thought about it, I'm sure it's happened. And one, tide turning. Why people suck at Keyforge in the modern era of Keyforge can quite often come to because they're turning the tide. It's a question of like, if you have two somewhat comparable or equivalent decks as far as what they're trying to do, I don't necessarily have to talk about Arc or whatever. Basically, they're on even footing, and like you have to mulligan, and you're not on the place. Your first turn of the game, you have 5 cards in your hand, and then you're gonna take. Like I see people taking the tide to play stuff like Jordan, or taking the tide to play Chelonia and one other. Something like that. Like that, the net loss of the chains that you're accruing for those next 3 very pivotal setup turns are huge. Like, basically, compare it to if before you decide to take the tide in the first 1 or 2 games, turns of the game, you need to mentally like try to compare it to every time you've played Binding Irons against an opponent on turn 1 or turn 2. That is devastating to them. Most of us have an idea of how that feels when we play it against our opponent, but I don't think that same Keyforge calculus is being taken into consideration when people chain themselves with the same 3 chains in the first 3 turns of the game. Because like taking the chains in the first 3 turns of the game not only means like you're going to be behind on board most likely, you're not going to dig into your deck as fast as your opponent most likely. Like all of these things are going to happen to you, and they're self-imposed. So I'm adding why we may suck at Keyforge to basically Binding Iron yourself. If you're doing it early game, that is what you consider. Is it okay to play Binding Irons against myself on turn 1, 2, 3? That is the actual effect that happens. Most of us are a little bit more familiar with that specific card and how it affects our opponents than we are the tide that is effectively the.
I guess this is a good question right now, too, because, like, is the tide going to stick around, right? I mean, it's always gonna be there from now on out because now it's a part of the game. But like, will in future sets, so like we saw Exalt and Ward in Worlds Collide, but then not a ton in Mass Mutation, and now we're seeing the Tide and Dark Tidings. Will set whatever number be as focused on the tide? Probably not, right?
I wouldn't be surprised if the other houses kind of fell off with like only 1 or 2 more tide emblem people. But I would be shocked if they removed the tide mechanism from the fish house. So I think we'll see more and new tide cards from the fish house. That makes sense. And then we'll see fewer tide in the other house.
I'm a big fan of how we just all of a sudden stopped calling them unfathomable, and they're just now the fish house.
I have a Google sheet where I track all my personal decks, and even in the Google sheet, I write
the fish house. I think I'm losing everybody.
The backlit colors.
think I'm losing Z here a little bit. Is it just me?
No, he seems like he's popping in and out a little bit.
Okay, so I'm not crazy. That's what I thought. Yeah. All right, so
I don't
Still need a new headset.
I think they can easily make unfathomable houses that don't have significant tied mechanics tied to them. I don't think you're going to see much in the next set.
like 1 or 2 cards, like we've seen.
I don't even know if you'll see that. Like, I think Tide is going to be one set and done, and you'll see it show up in, in small things because of legacies. What I'm looking for.
I think hypothesis-wise, I'm in the same boat. What I was told is basically they're adding another card. They're going to have a lot of game flexibility to add something new with that card in future sets. But I did not picture that as just being a Tide card straight out. And honestly, if you look at Unfathomable as a house, Unfathomable kind of has a bit going on that not everything is related to Tide mechanic. And so it would be pretty easy to sub out some of those cards, and all of a sudden that Tide is just here with Dark Tidings.
I mean, they could just do Unfathomable as a one-and-done house, too.
That breaks my heart.
It could happen, right? There's no reason it has to be printed every set, or ever again. I'm with you. Like, it seems like a big bunch of investment to then not use anymore. So I think we will see them again, but they're sets ahead, so you'd think they would have already, supposedly they're sets ahead, right? So if the next set's going to have Tide in it, you think it would already be there. What do you think the feedback in general is going to be regarding the Tide? Like, I haven't seen a ton of negative feedback. I haven't seen a ton of people saying, I love the Tide and I wish it was always here. I haven't seen a bunch of people being like, I'm never playing this set because it has the Tide. People are saying, I'm not playing this set because, well, you can't have creature control and amber control together. And that makes it sad.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm very, like, I don't know the word for it. I'm very, like, indecisive. Like I said, I don't think I have a bad experience with the Tide, but I haven't had a great one where I'm like, man, if I didn't have the Tide, what would I do with myself? So, I mean, you know what they say in the wrestling biz, there's nothing worse than no reaction to something. There's got to be a reaction one way or the other. If there's none, then it's not successful.
The thing with the Tide and other things they're going to add to the game is because this game does not have a cost association with cards, right? There's not the direct cost of mana cost in Magic, right? They have to introduce mechanics that add cost to cards to be able to make them more powerful or more interesting from Coda, right? Like, you have to add some sort of cost if you want to print new and more interesting cards than what you had before. Otherwise, the game breaks. And you're playing then their whole model of decks forever kind of thing don't work. So things like the Tide or Alpha, Omega, cards that give you restrictions after play are always going to be part of it, because that's how they can balance out varying power mechanics.
But do we need the Tide? I mean, isn't introducing new houses every few sets going to be enough?
Well, but that doesn't do anything to being able to change a card.
Okay.
Right? That just gives them a new theme. So,
well, I mean, but each house we've learned in the past has its own, like, Sanctum captures Ember. Shadows at one point in time stole Ember. They really don't do that. Actually, I don't even know what Shadows does anymore, to be honest with you.
Shadows actually can steal quite a lot again. They're pretty ambery in the set.
Well, I haven't come across any of those yet.
Into lots of tiny damage. That's kind of Shadows things these days. Like, we do lots of small amounts of damage. Yay! We
But
can't
like
actually kill anything.
each house has kind of like, or originally it all had its own like kind of thing.
But that isn't. That's only a cost if they do that by excluding something else for that strength, and that has never been the case. Like you say, Sanctum is about capturing an armor, and it's not about amber control. And then they give them cards like
Right.
like Doorstep, right, which is just one of the best scaling amber control cards in the game. And same thing. Like Logos isn't about amber control, but they consistently get one of the better amber control cards in sets.
Right.
So,
but to me, that just seems like a design flaw.
Well, but I'm saying that means, or they're not choosing to use this house can only do this as a mechanic. And I think that would make it even worse, because then you'd end up with even more Worlds Collide Brobnar houses where they just don't do anything useful, and it would make the game even worse. So I don't think that's a route that they should be looking at. I mean, like, they're going to continue to add mechanics like Alpha, Omega, Tide, whatever, to be able to balance interesting and more powerful cards. Now, whether if they're successful with that every time is another story. Like, and it seems like a few Tide cards are definitely worth taking the Tide for. Although, like Z was saying, people are taking the Tide when there isn't necessarily enough payment for it.
Yeah.
Through my experience of play, like, even the value they're getting from having the high Tide is often not enough to make it worth me taking 3 chains to take it away from them, especially offset. Like, I've come to that conclusion often, that if I'm offset once they take the Tide, I often don't want to take it away because it shuts down all their effects that flip it, and it isn't worth me 3 chains to essentially give them 3 chains, or I'm taking 3 chains and they're ignoring that effect because they have some other Tide raising card in their deck. So it's my play experience, now that I've played a bit, says taking the Tide away is almost always a waste of time because you can't keep it, right?
And that's just when you're offset, though.
Even onset half the time. If you don't have a reason to take the Tide, like, you don't take the Tide. There's only a few cards we've talked about a few times, which is the Logos one that gives an amber for having the high Tide, and the Static Array, which changes key costs based off of Tide. Those are the only reason cards that I can really think about often that say I have to be taking the Tide, because otherwise you're forging for 4 or 5 or whatever your combination is. And there I may have to be taking chains, and that's really good. But a lot of the rest of the stuff, like, if it's an on-turn effect, there's no point in me taking the Tide from you. Like, if you have your Chelonian on board, I can't kill it. There's no value in me taking the Tide, because if it's worth it, you just take the Tide back. Right? Like, it's just not worth taking the Tide away from people most time, is my play experience. I don't know what else. I don't know how you guys are finding this. And I've seen people rack up ridiculous amount of chains trying to take the Tide away. I don't know what they think they're doing outside of maybe adding chains to me if they're taking the Tide away from me, because if I need the Tide, I got to pay the chains to get it back. But if you're offset and you take the Tide away, I can just leave it on you until I actually get a strong benefit out of it. Like, you don't have to have the Tide.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how many, like, Tide-like effects we're going to get. You know what I mean? Like, other, like you said, they've got to do something to keep it interesting and going forward. But, like, I don't know if the Tide was an awesome one, because now that adds another piece to the game. And I talked about it many, many moons ago, where, like, the more pieces you add to a game, especially a card game, people kind of get less and less interested. The more pieces a game has, the less interesting or less successful a card game is.
Well, it makes it just way harder to play the game later. Because, like, if the next set is Sun and Moon, and in addition to the Tide, you have Day and Night, right? And then the next set after that is some other silly weather condition. Is it raining or
raining
is
or
it
snowing?
Right? When snow-covered lands come in, that can all become quite the disaster to play, but one place where this game excels in that versus open play Magic the Gathering, which is our other like contemporary that has all those mechanics, is you're essentially to some extent always playing limited in Keyforge because only 2 sets are showing up to the game. So although 5 sets down the road, each set could have a silly mechanic like this, like we're each only playing 1 set. So you can't be playing 5 sets of silly mechanics unless you have a ton of legacies that really matter to those things, right? You know, I'm playing Dark Tidings and you're playing Sun and Moon, so then snow-covered lands don't matter to us because we're not playing that set. So this game has that advantage of your number of things you have to deal with are limited because decks are created to a set and you're not mixing sets within a deck to a great extent. So they, in that regard, they can continue to add things because not every game is going to have everything in it. Does that make sense? Right?
It does. No, it does. I see where you're going. I just,
all right,
I have all sorts of questions, and I don't think we have enough time to kind of go through them, so we'll have to go through them in another day because I'm not creative. So
what she was talking about earlier, the 2 cards that you feel that you have to be able to take the tide back when you're offset. You're talking about Static Array and you're talking about Mechabooey. Mechabooey was your Logos card, which is an artifact at the start of each player's turn. If the tide is high for that player, they gain 1 amber. So that consistent piece is definitely there, something for us. And I do think there has to be a cost benefit analysis done by the Keyforge player. We're talking about Keyforge math. You have to be able to evaluate and look at what is the cost of being able to raise chain. When was it? I know that we talked earlier in May about that, but I'm seeing people who frankly are taking the chains a little bit too much when they don't really need to. There are some killer cards, but honestly, most cards in this set, I'm not terribly worried. You can have it. You can have it.
I've seen a few Hydra Cataloger, which this card says when a player raises the tide, they archive the top card of their deck. That the chains have gotten so high that the players continue to raise the tide because the only way they're getting more cards is by Hydra Cataloger. And that's just silly.
I think that is silly, and I don't think it's an optimal piece. And as we're looking at strategy, I think timing in the game really matters. I've seen some very effective Keyforge players, frankly, near the end of the game. That's a great time to be able to take it back, especially if there's a huge benefit and you're playing offset. Take that away from the Dark Tidings player, and that could be the difference in winning that game, especially in very, very competitive games. I also think the idea of cards versus chain. Am I taking the 3 chains? Or am I going and playing a card to get that same benefit? And that has a huge impact on that Keyforge math, in my opinion.
How about you, Z? What are you seeing? Like
Z, unfortunately, his headset died.
Oh, so he left us.
So I don't know. I'm thinking he's trying to get back or find something different. Now he's messaging me. He asked me for a good one forever ago. Anyways, Dan and Z are kind of taking this big adventure. And I think it's something worth talking about. Now, I'll remind you, this is very, very, very extraordinary theoretical at the current stage. It's new, but I think it's worth gauging interest. And I think it's worth kind of exploring some of the options. So you guys can come over to the AC Discord. And if you have more questions, ask Dan and Z, because remember, this is not very fleshed out yet. But this is a thought. So, Dan, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody what you guys have been kind of working on?
Well, kind of coming off the news that FFG is not supporting Gen Con. And there's no announcement regarding any other convention. There's no talk from OP. Like, if there is a Vault Tour this year, it's going to be November or December, right? And we're ready. Like, we're ready to play real life Keyforge. Z went to an event. I've been to an event. Ewok went to an event with me. Like, we are ready to go play real Keyforge. And if you look around the world, the French championships have happened. There's China had a championship. Like, if FFG doesn't want to do it through the Vault Tour system, why don't we just make our own Vault Tour caliber event that's live play? Like, there are some other people who, KFPL and back in the day with Shadow Worlds, like that have done some online tournaments that were of that scale, but it's time for real live play in that scale. So we're trying to figure out how to get that done. So, we're on this path of trying to figure out where you would hold it and how much it costs to get a place. And then you got to find, depending on what locale you look in, some places are still high risk COVID areas and you don't want to go there. So, that's a thing. And then, we're thinking on a scale that would allow people to fly in, that we would expect some people to fly in. So then you got to figure out that near an airport thing and the logistics that goes along with it starts to get a little daunting. Like, it's really easy to spitball the idea. And now we're actually trying to look at the logistics of finding a place. And then one of the things that people never consider is it's not that hard to find a place, but finding one that's affordable is a pain. But then, did you know none of those places ever come with tables? Like, you almost always end up renting them from another place.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Never. And then often if they do have tables, they only have the round dinner tables for weddings, which are not Keyforge compatible, right? So,
well, if you put everybody at one table, or, like two sets of players at one table.
No.
Yeah, you're going to play across a 12-foot table from each other?
I mean, it's social distanced, so, there's that.
Well, I mean, current CDC guidelines no longer require social distance for the those with vaccines, right? So, going along with new health guidelines, you can have gatherings and you can do things.
So I guess I'll jump in. My understanding for CDC guidelines is that you are able to go ahead if you have been vaccinated, if you have waited your time period afterwards, I believe that was 10 to 14 days, you are then able to go ahead and not wear your mask. However, we are still looking at social distance. So I know that when the event that we went to, everyone wore masks and I felt a lot more comfortable in that regard. So I think that's a really, really important piece. And there's a lot of parameters that we're trying to work with here to make sure that it is safe, it is secure for everyone, and that people feel comfortable. Those who don't feel comfortable, obviously, we would love to have you there, but we're not willing to go ahead and risk anyone who is, at risk. This is more for those who are able to. So is there interest? Would you actually come out? If there was a large scale event, if we could provide that distance as best we could under those conditions.
And I think that's the biggest question right now too. So I know a lot of the question is where, and I know you guys had talked about Vegas.
Yeah, which turns out is a high risk area, and they still have several things shut down.
Okay.
So probably not a choice. So then we are trying to see if there's any actual convention happenings that we could buddy up with. Because that finding and managing space is kind of thing. And we even reached out to Yeti because they have a lot of experience organizing events all over the place. So as a person and resource that we know is out there that could help us find and figure that out
and guide us along the way.
Right.
Because I mean, I don't know about you guys. I've run small tournaments before, but I've never ran something where 150, 200 people show up.
I have been part of large events at that size before, although I've never done the location organization. I've done tournament organization, events organization, setup, tear down, a lot of that, but never on the organizing body part to having the location and if insurance is required, which I don't think you'd have to have anything special for this. But really having it turns out having inns in this world of venues is a huge saver because a lot of these venues have very awful rules regarding or they're just not friendly to an event like us that's very thrifty and isn't selling a great amount of things or anything. A lot of them have food requirements, or if it's attached to the hotel, you got to rent so many rooms from them too, and it just gets very. It gets very potentially expensive and a burden to the people organizing because they basically have to upfront the costs, and if they don't recoup it, like you're out that money.
Right.
And like it's one thing to be out, $2,000 or $3,000 in Keyforge product that didn't sell because you didn't have enough players at the event, because you have other outlets to sell that. Or if you're a junkie like I am, you just keep it and open it, right? Like, that's a
You just add it to the stack in Dan's basement.
Yeah, it's a cost, like I'm happy to potentially absorb. But if you spend, some of these places for 3 days are $4,500 or $6,000, and if you only get 40 people or some horrible thing like that show up, you're talking about eating $4,000 for room rental. That there's no recouping that cost, right? So that's always the scare with renting out a space for a paid attendance event. If the attendance is bad, like you get, it's a real financial burden.
You eat it if its attendance is bad.
Yeah, and then like I have contacts for some venues. Like I can get venues near my area where I live fairly cheap to potentially big enough to run one of these for free, right? Especially if I was like, well, I'm going to have 50 to 150 people looking to buy food from you during that time. They're like, great, like use the area. But I live an hour from the nearest airport, and that just is no good for trying to draw people from a large crowd. You gotta.
Are you closer to O'Hare or to?
I'm definitely closer to Milwaukee.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
But it's only by like 15 minutes drive.
Right. So I guess that's the question to you guys. Is this something you guys want to see? Are you ready to go, again, with FFG stating they're not going to be part of Gen Con? Are you ready to go out into the world, number one? Number two, would you be willing to travel for a larger scale event? And, number three, where would you want to see it? Because I don't know if you guys even looked into the possibility, because Illinois is pretty big. That Chicago area is pretty large. Now, this was just me spitballing, because I'm like, well, Illinois is big, and I know there's a ton of people, on next door and up north and a little bit to the northwest who would probably come. But I don't know if that's enough.
It's hard to say, right? It's hard.
It's very tough to say right now.
And like my contacts for Chicago locations don't really exist. Like I don't have any experience with Chicago locations. So that's so we're looking at ideas, trying to figure out what we can do. But I think between Z and I and you two and enough other people we know, we have the resources to run that large scale of event, the organization, expertise with the rules and the software and those kinds of things, that we could run an event of that scale. And now, really,
because I think one of the questions too,
a place.
This is just me thinking right now, is I guess people were traveling for magical shards before, so I don't know if that would be a
prize. Like, really,
what do we do for prizing? I mean, you won, congrats, here's a pat on the back.
Yeah, I mean, like, really, when you were going to a vault tour, like, it's win or don't get enough of a prize to be worth your time, right? Like, let's be honest. Like, even if you placed second, which I did once, whatever it is, the 300 shards I got for placing second doesn't even get close to covering, the cost of the gas to drive there and back. Like, you weren't going to vault tours because of the prizes. And I think I mean, I have OP kits that we can give away stuff from.
See, what would be nice, and I know we've been in contact with Vince from Yeti. What would be nice is, he's just south in St. Louis, right?
Well, that's one of the places Z and I were spitballing. Like Yeti have very good contacts in the same place where Collinsville was. They use often. So potentially there, but the other part of that factor that comes to me is like Collinsville only had 68 people. It was the smallest vault tour ever. Like, so do you want to go?
I don't know if that was necessarily due to location. I don't think it had a lot to do with the location. I think it had everything to do with it was a 3-week turnaround. Like all of a sudden it was just like, oh, by the way, we're gonna have a vault in Collinsville.
Sure. And the only reason I'm willing to even spitball something that's only gonna probably be a 4, 6, 8 week turnaround here is there hasn't been any other events. So people I've talked to and people I know both have vacation and money because they haven't been able to spend it anywhere else. It's not like you were just at a vault a month ago and you're questioning if you can travel to another one. You haven't been able to do anything in months or a year.
A year? I was just going to say, probably more like a year.
And this is clearly not everybody's situation, right? Not everybody is in the same situation with me where they don't really have anything to do with their vacation and they've managed to squirrel away some extra money by not traveling to vaults every month and can afford to go everywhere. But there are a lot of people who are in my boat and could travel.
So I guess let us know. Come on over to the Archons Corner Discord. You can find the link down below. We're interested. We want to know because obviously, like I said, this was highly theoretical. There is literally zero timeline on when this is going to happen. But obviously, we want to if we're going to get the word out, we would like longer than, a month, so people know what's going on.
My dream rumor that I have here is there is supposedly an unused Grand Championship kit, which those are not run by FFG. So although FFG OP is not supporting and running events, a Grand Championship is run by an independent thing from FFG, and you got to buy the kit from them to run it. So there is this thing that if we could present the location and the space to FFGOP, maybe you could try to get that kit. And maybe they tell you not a chance in hell, or maybe that kit doesn't actually exist anymore. But there is the potential to turn it into a real event if we could get it on the books and roll.
I mean, what's nice is if we can maybe get Yeti to come and then get FFG to maybe open up the prize wall. I know there's still stuff available.
See, now that's getting...
I know we're getting into some strange, odd, territory that may or, that's probably less likely to happen.
I mean, China FFG did it, right? They opened the prize wall for that.
I don't even know what it was. It was just some large-scale event, wasn't it? It wasn't a vault tour or a championship.
China Championships, whatever they called it. So that's what I'm saying, but that's a different country and under different FFGOP rules, per se, than what ours are. And potentially in the US and they're not ready to officially as FFG support events, which is fine. They have that choice. They currently support in if it's safe in your area to run chain bounds, you can run chain bounds. And if you want to buy prize support from us, you can buy prize support from us. That's their current support, which is fine by me if they're not ready to bring on large scale events. But the Grand Championship kit is just a big version of that, right? It's you want to run this big event, okay, we're going to sell you the thing and you do it. They don't show up for it. They don't require any special support. So, I mean, but to even try to get that kit from them, I think we have to be farther along our place and time and plan. And actually, right now, one of the things we're thinking is give Mass Mutation its 3-deck sealed style event that it never got and will never get, right? Because when Vault Tours come back, I doubt they're going to run a Mass Mutation sealed, right? They'll stay with new set.
You would think so. I mean, traditionally they always did do set, but I mean they might run like some strange one off because it never got one. Maybe. I mean, I'm not going to rule it out.
But we've also, when Z and I were bouncing ideas around, we kind of want to try potentially a PAX level schedule, which we know is a very busy weekend, but the back-to-back 3-day Vault Tour scale events. Because there are a lot of people who are way more interested in Archon than Sealed, and we respect that as well. So, kind of want to be able to try to do both if we could. Call it the Archon's Corner Championships. And, have a ton of fun.
Like I said, people, let us know. Go over to Discord, send us an email, archonscorner@gmail.com. Tell us about it on our Facebook. Tell us about it on Twitter. We're curious. We want to know. And if, I don't want Dan and Z kind of kicking this around to nothing really comes of it. So, I mean,
for my love for the game, there is definitely an amount of money and time I'm willing to invest in this, even if it fizzles out and dies.
Right.
Like that's fine by me. But my experience here has been, even with our tiny corner of the Crucible that we run events on, like I have had to put a head cap on my Tuesday night sealed events because it turns out I don't want to run 5 rounds. We talked about this a little bit last week. And then Lokar, who is also running Wednesday night sealeds, like he's had his highest player count he's ever had yesterday. So we are seeing increase in players and interest. Like online events are still getting reasonable amounts of players. I've seen, new set has brought new interest. I've seen new players interested in the game. And, I'm okay with having to invest time into the game that I like to play to make it even better. Like that's been my experience with every game in the past. Like if you think it's the company's responsibility to do everything, or not that if you think it is, but if you expect the company to do everything in promoting a game, that's not going to happen. Even Magic the Gathering wouldn't exist if the stores and the players didn't promote it, right? And friends were bringing them in. Like that's how all those games really succeed too. Having the OP scene is important, but it's got a lot to do with the players continuing to expand. Like there are a lot of non-sanctioned Magic tournaments that happen and goofy Magic events that happen too. Like this is true across all games. So, why not build something awesome in the FFG world that isn't, or in the Keyforge world that isn't stricken to FFG rules per se.
So again, let us know. Discord, Facebook, Twitter. You probably just have to search Archon's Corner and you'll find us. So I know we're running with a little bit of a time restriction today. So today is going to be a shorter episode. We can kind of go into the rest of our list for next week, which will be back. So guys, any kind of final words, final thoughts? We'll start with JR since he's been so quiet.
I know that this is kind of a big thought. It was a big bummer actually to go ahead and hear that Gen Con was not going to have access for Keyforge, competitive Keyforge. I know that took a lot out, but I want to keep encouraging all those out there who are playing. And again, our numbers are high. Play if you can, play in person, play online. We have a phenomenal community. And I'm excited to see what we're going to be able to do in the future. And if you can't play from home, again, great community that's there. But eventually we will be able to get back. And I think that's what we're really looking for is your feedback at this point. So all ears and kind of listening.
Mr. Dan?
Remember, you're not a surfer. You don't have to go searching for the high tide.
All right, and that's going to do it for us for this week. Mr. Dan, I see you have a new logo.
That's right. I have a grumpy sheep.
Okay.
To now represent myself.
Did you put that in the spread shirt?
In the spread shirt?
Yeah.
No, that's mine. Nobody else gets to have my logo.
Oh, you don't want anybody else to get you don't you're gonna hoard it. Nobody else wants. I mean, I want a Dr. Sheep shirt.
No.
No,
I'm still waiting for Z to come up with his "While You Suck at Keyforge" shirt so I can buy another one.
Oh, okay. We'll have to kind of get that one rolling because I was like, man, I kind of want a Dr. Sheep shirt because I was gonna do something and then I was gonna figure out maybe Ewok just gets a collector worm on his shirt. It's just a worm of some sort, but we'll figure that out another day. But as always, that's going to do it for us. That's going to do it for us this week. As always, guys, keep playing. Join in the Thursday Chainbound. Oh, goodness. I'm going to screw this all up. We have Thursday Archon Chainbound. We have Sunday Sealed Chainbound. No. Sunday is the arms race or arms reduction race, correct?
If that's going on right now, we have Sunday Chainbound, which is linked to our leaderboard.
Okay, leaderboard. That's it.
Tuesday Sealed, which is linked to our leaderboard, and we have Thursday Chainbound, which is not linked to the leaderboard. And then Lokar is running Sealed on Wednesday as well, and he has a sweet prize wall you can earn points towards and get. He's basically got most of the good prize kits. You can earn enough shards to get a Shadows figure from him.
Sweet.
Or lots of other cool stuff. So that's definitely worth checking out if you're looking for another way to earn Fantasy Flight prize support.
Yeah. I knew I was going to screw that up. I thought Sunday was sealed, but it's not. It's Tuesday. Thank you for fixing that.
A lot of us just open a deck and play it anyways because that's fun.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. It's not like, there's not plenty of decks floating around now. Although you did say it was sold out, so.
I think their next shipment has come in because they've advertised boxes for sale again.
Is this another print run, or is this...
No, I think it's probably 2 containers that were just slow as buckets to get there.
They were turned sideways in a canal of some sort?
Yep.
So, anyway, guys, thanks for listening. We'll see y'all next week.
Have you got the goods? Been wondering if your heart's still open, and if so, I wanna know what time it should. Simmer down and poker up. I'm sorry to interrupt, it's just I'm constantly on the cusp. I've tried and to kiss you.